Hi, my name is Logan Walker with the Walk of Life podcast, where I interview people, break down their lives, and get to know what they know. Welcome, Don Richter, who is a Supreme Court judge in Pacific and Wahkiakum County. How you doing, Don?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. You gave me a bit of a promotion, though. I'm a Superior Court judge.
Oh,
Supreme Court, no, I'm not there, but no, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me today.
yeah. So we're just going to jump right into it. First question I ask everybody is, what do you want your legacy to be? So how do you want people to remember you by?
Well, I don't know that I really thought too much about legacy, but if I guess what I would say is I would hope that my legacy would be that the world would be a little bit better off having me pass through it. So I guess that would be the legacy I'd hope, that the folks that I've interacted with and my family and whatnot, they've been enriched by my presence to some degree, and that it's just a little bit better off than what it would have been without me. So that's about the best legacy I think I could hope for.
In any specific ways or anything like that?
Well, I think, in personal relationships, that we journey together with a select few of folks through this world together, and the way we support each other, the way we encourage each other, and we get through it despite all the pitfalls and the suffering together, that it's worth doing. And I'm having trouble, I guess, doing more than that.
In life, there's so many ups and downs that I feel like you definitely have to have those relationships with you to kind of push through and then grow from them and learn from your experiences, and that's a great takeaway.
Yeah, you get more particular, obviously for my children, I hope that I'm a good father that provides them the ability and the support to spring forward in their lives. And, as far as my wife's concerned, that I've been a good partner and someone who has shared the ups and downs with love and compassion throughout our lives. So, individually, I guess I would hope that my legacy means different things to different people, but overall in general, just, and the idea that we're a little bit better off having had Don Richter in the world, I guess, would be the legacy I'd hope for.
And you mentioned kids, which is great, because I feel like kids are a reflection of their parents a little bit, because they've had such a large impact. So if you, spend the right time and do the right things with your kid, that is one great way to leave your legacy on the world.
Well, absolutely. Well, that's a miniature progeny. I mean, it is your physical mark that testifies to the fact that you existed, right? I mean, you leave behind, in some part, a piece of yourself with your children. And my wife and I, we have 8 children, so we...
So you got lots of legacies to leave.
For right now, at least, it seems like we're leaving a mark on the world, but they've been a real source of joy and rewarding. It makes this life, so much better, having gone through and having the children and feeling like there's a purpose. And it's hard to get wrapped up in yourself all the time when you have these other little lives that you're responsible for, and a lot of effort and time that you put into them. It keeps you, I think, from being too self-centered, taking yourself too seriously all the time.
Yeah.
And, so you get a lot out of it yourself, but obviously you hope your children, these new souls that have been brought into creation can go forth and have meaningful lives as well.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned it's good for yourself as well to grow, because kids are watching all the time. So it's like you got to be doing your best the most you can as often as,
Yeah, I don't know that you can really, truly ever really grow up if you don't have, to some degree, children or someone else that you're responsible for. I mean, there's a part of you that once you become responsible for someone else, that you just don't get to indulge anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only person. You have to think about others, and at least if you do it well. I'm obviously not every parent is a good parent, and I strive to be a good parent, and a big portion of that is making sure that the decisions you're making are not based on yourself anymore. And so, and I think if you don't have something like that that requires you to get outside of yourself
Mm-hmm.
and have the responsibility, I think that's a big part of what actual maturing and growing up is about. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people that don't have kids aren't mature and aren't grown ups, but I mean,
But it's a whole different level.
absolutely. I mean, it becomes a lot more real when all of a sudden you come home from the hospital with you, your wife, and now this little bundle with you that, if it's going to survive, it's up to you and your wife to
Yeah.
make sure that happens. And that's a scary moment for a new parent, but also just an amazing, the start of an amazing new journey in life.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Did from kid to kid, did you feel more and more confident, and did you adjust your parenting styles at all as you learned from?
Well, it's amazing. Every kid, same mom, same dad, has been, different experience. So it's been interesting to watch and see them grow. Have we changed our parenting? I think we've gotten better at parenting as we've gotten older. It's gotten easier in that. When my firstborn, Sam, we were, life was hard
Mm-hmm.
when you're younger and you're struggling with resources and providing for a family. That has its own kind of stress involved there, which can bleed over into relationships, arguments with your spouse, just coming home and feeling stressed after work and sitting down trying to do the bills and that sort of thing and realizing there's not enough to go around for everything.
Right.
So, so there's those stresses that we've been raising kids now for 21 plus years. So those stresses have eased as we've gotten obviously more able to provide. As providing for the family has gotten easier, that type of stress has relieved itself, which I think frees up some of your brain power to be more concerned about, the more, I guess, philosophical or deeper aspects of parenting, not just making sure there's food on the table, but actually that, the child is being emotionally prepared for adulthood. So, there's definitely some mistakes we made earlier on with some of the younger kids that you look back now and you're like, boy, we didn't handle that so well. But I think, as anything in life, when you look back, you got to give yourself a little bit of grace for understanding where you were at the time and understand that you're doing the best you can. It also helps you appreciate your parents a lot more too, for anything that you think your parents didn't do perfectly when they were raising you. It's I think parenting, of all the things that I've done in my life, it is the hardest job that I've ever had.
So you talked about a little bit with your spouse. Like how is the relationship different from pre-children to after children?
Well, it goes to maturity again. I think pre-children, it's a lot easier to be self-centered, and that self-centered nature of human nature can prevent you from having a true commitment to each other. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot easier to be selfish, put blankly, and that in a relationship is always a problem. So having kids is just another dose of realizing that it's not all about you, and you get to step back out of you and commit to the good of the other, which is the purpose of that sacrificial love that we're called to do in marriage, which love is not an emotion. I mean, it's nice to feel good and have that love and that emotion, but love is really sacrificing for the other, for the good of the other, not for what they can give you or what you get back out of it. But when you truly are loving, it really is a sacrifice. And so it's a lot easier. You get better at it, I think, the more you practice it. So, as two young kids coming together in a new relationship, you kind of wear off the edges from each other a little bit, and that gets easier to do as you go on and you throw kids into the mix. now you're both working together, sacrificing for this new life that's brought into the picture. So that becomes another, I guess, avenue to practice love and get better at it.
So when you had kids, did you guys sit down and talk about, how we're going to do this, how we're going to balance everything out, or is it just like kind of an understanding?
No. That's not how that worked at all. We have 8 children. I would say none of them are planned in the way that some people plan their children. We're going to do this at this time, this at this time, and this at that time. No. We had some general discussions about what we thought life was going to look like when we were getting married, and we thought at most we'd have. I think she wanted 3 kids or 2 kids. And then I had said, well, I came from a household. We both came from families with 3 kids. I was a middle child, and so was she. And I said, well, I would like to have even numbers, because it seems like, if you have 3, there's always 2 ganging up against one way or the other. So, that's, I can remember that conversation, and just thinking, well, I think, maybe 4 is a good number, So that's the discussions we've had as far as the planning, and of course we didn't meet that plan very well at all. But,
did you ever talk about your relationship in the means, like after that first kid came out, talked about you and me, what we're gonna do, or anything like that?
Well, I think you definitely have to be on the same page.
Right.
So, like I said, parenting is the hardest job that I've ever tried to do, and I cannot fathom how single parents do it. Or if you don't have that partner, it's hard with 2 of you that are on the same page, that are working together. Try to do that on your own. That's just, you would be
exhausted.
I don't see how you do it. And so my hat's off to the folks that are struggling with that and doing that. But I'm very blessed, very happy that we've been able to stick together on it. And you have your arguments about, okay, well, how do we handle this situation? And you talk through those. And we've tried very hard not to have those arguments in front of the kids.
Right.
I forget which family member it was, but they started talking. We were about to have our first child, and they said, "Okay, well, now the war begins." The war, usually you're talking to family and like, "Oh, this is a great, wonderful, happy time," and also, and then this one family member is like, "No, now the war starts, and it's you against them as far as the kids, and you better not show any weakness in front of them, because they will exploit that." And it's a little hyperbolic, but the point being is that you have to be working together, because if you're not working together, I think it all falls apart. So there's obviously some times that we had to have some discussions, but we were fortunate enough that from the beginning we tried really hard not to have any of those disagreements in front of the kids. And I think that provided the ability for us to provide a united, stable front for the children, so they're not worried about mom and dad's relationship and that affecting their stability. But also, it keeps the children from being able to manipulate you to some degree. Children are inherently selfish, and if they think they can get away with something or get something from one parent that they can't get from the other, they're going to use that information, and that's just how children are. And so I think that's been a big help. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's, I guess, we've definitely had conversations about our parenting.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for talking and communication. I think that's a very key to having a good relationship in all aspects of life. Your job, with your staff, with your family, with your partners, with wherever. I think just talking it out and, like you said, being on the same page is so key in having a healthy relationship and growing as people. And I think that's a very good.
No, communication is definitely key, and it's one of those things. If you don't know something's wrong, you can't fix it.
Yeah.
And so and I think a lot of relationships that start off, and we've had those arguments where we find ourselves arguing about something silly, and we realize halfway through the argument, I'm not really arguing about this thing.
Yeah.
I'm really arguing about something we haven't even talked about, that we didn't even know existed, because it's just been sitting there. And it's been, bugging me or bugging her to the point that it's kind of spilling over into something that doesn't make any, a silly argument about. who knows about what the dishes or the
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's that's not why we're having this argument. There's something else going on, and trying to get to what's really the issue, and having an open, honest discussion about that can be difficult, can be painful, depending on what the issue is. But I think it's a lot preferable to be doing it that way and deal with it as soon as you can than the fallout from it, not dealing with it.
So, moving into your childhood, just tell me about your childhood. Where you were born? Where you raised?
Well, I want to acknowledge up front, I had an ideal childhood. I mean, I had wonderful parents, have wonderful parents that loved us, loved each other. I had great grandparents on both sides that had good relationships with. Always felt loved, never felt that I was not wanted or supported or that sort of thing. So, and growing up as a child, you don't realize that that's not what everyone has.
Yeah.
So as you get older, and especially in the work that I do, you see more and more, and it's just so disturbing to see that that's not as common as it. Well, you thought everyone had that, and that's just not true. So I was born in Louisiana, Shreveport area, Bossier City, and we lived there for about 5 years in a little subdivision called I forget the name of the subdivision, but it was a fun little neighborhood. It was mostly modest little houses. Looking back on it now, it's probably 1,100 square feet houses. There was a big Air Force base in Shreveport, and the oil and gas industry, which my dad worked in for Arkla Gas and Equipment. First 5 years there, had friends in the neighborhood, rode bikes around. Mm-hmm. Even as a 5-year-old, I can remember, riding my bike, to the neighbor's house, a few blocks down or whatever, and just had a really, really fun childhood. My mom was the kind of mom that always had the Halloween parties or the birthday parties and that sort of stuff,
That's awesome.
For all the neighborhood kids. And then, we would spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house in Gina, Louisiana, which is central Louisiana. A lot of fishing growing up, hunting, squirrel hunting, duck hunting, that sort of thing. So just wonderful experiences. Great family, seeing all the cousins and that sort of thing at the family gatherings and get-togethers, which was every holiday. Mm-hmm. So just an idyllic. I mean, I miss it terribly. That childhood, and so I don't know that type of childhood in the way that I experienced it really exists anymore, and that's just really sad to see.
Yeah, that's definitely a whole new world generation with all the technology and everything.
No, there was no technology.
It's crazy.
There was definitely none of that. So for the first 5 years there in Louisiana, and then we moved. The oil kind of dried up in Louisiana, at least for a while. The export, had problems there, so a lot of the gas and stuff was shutting down. And also, that I think the Air Force base closed, and a lot of our friends started moving out, and the neighborhood kind of depleted. And so Dad got transferred from Louisiana up to Arkansas, and to work still for Arkla, I believe. And so we moved up to outside of Little Rock, a little subdivision called Maumelle. And again, really idyllic, suburb. My mom would walk us or we'd bike to the school. That was the neighborhood school. Bike trails through the neighborhood. It was just really great.
Just being always outdoors. And...
we would leave in the day, the afternoon to get home from school, whatever. My mom, thankfully, she's a nurse, but was able not to have to work until we were in school. And I had a younger brother, so even for the first couple of years that I was in school, Mom was still at home. So when we get home, Mom would be there. And I can remember coming home, we'd have a snack ready for us and that kind of stuff. It sounds almost cliche, like this is, it's not Leave It to Beaver, but that kind of thing where it was like, she wasn't wearing pearls while she was doing the dishes. But, it was that kind of environment where Mom was there, and and you'd come home and you'd have a snack, and then you'd go get on your bike, and you'd be off in the neighborhood until dinner time, basically. And this is 6, 7, 8 years old. You weren't worried about wondering where the kids were. They were just out,
Yeah.
and at least I didn't feel like we were ever kept tabs on all that much. And so, me and our little friend group in the neighborhood there, we'd be riding around the bikes to different people's houses and doing all that kind of stuff, and just exploring and having a good time doing that. So that was up to about the age of 8. And then my mom really wanted to get out on property again. She kind of had the opportunity growing up in Louisiana and East Texas to experience not farm life, but a little more rural life. So we ended up moving out to a piece of property about 60 acres, about an hour outside of Little Rock in a town called El Paso, Arkansas. And then, really got heavy into 4-H, raising animals and that sort of thing, and chickens. We started with chickens, which we actually ended up with chickens before we made the move, because we had to buy the chickens in time to get them for the fair that year. And I can remember my dad came home one day and there were chickens on top of the roof of the suburban house in the suburban neighborhood. We're not supposed to have animals or anything like that in this neighborhood. And he comes home and there's like chickens on the roof, because my brother and I had decided, well, chickens can fly, so we're throwing them up in the air. And chickens don't exactly fly, but when you throw them up high enough, they can flap their wings enough to like coast over to the roof of the house. So I think we had 4 or 5 chickens. He had to get off the roof of the house that evening, and we were explained that was not an appropriate way to play with chickens. So so those kind of things where you take these kids that have been raised mostly in the suburbs and just experiencing animals and farm life for the first time, and so we had a great time doing that. And it was a little hard leaving our friends and that sort of thing, but we had friends come out. It was about an hour away from where we lived there in Maumelle to El Paso, where we moved to. So we still were able to keep relationships and that kind of stuff. So again, just looking back on our childhood, it is really, really no complaints whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah.
So after Arkansas, how did you end up in Washington? I mean, it sounds like you're jumping all over the country here.
Well, we did a little bit. From El Paso, we stayed in El Paso mostly. We did until I graduated high school. And in high school, I was the El Paso. How do I describe El Paso? It's about the size of LaBam, I guess, a little bit bigger maybe. So it didn't have its own school. I know LaBam used to have its own school, but I don't know that El Paso ever had its own school. So the closest town that we had was Beebe, and that's where I went to high school and our grade school and high school. So graduate there, and then off to college at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro, which is about an hour and a half outside of Memphis, Tennessee, and was looking to, I majored in theater. And
okay.
So
what was the dream job going into like right after high school graduated? What was your goal? What did you want to be?
I didn't know. I mean, for a long time I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I realized I was not a good student. I'll put it that way.
Right.
I was intelligent, but I was not a good student. They would say I was not living up to my potential, I guess is what would be said. I just didn't enjoy schoolwork,
Right.
And I enjoyed it extracurricular activities, like, I was in the drama club, I played in the band, I was, played football and, that sort of thing. So I enjoyed all those activities, but I didn't care for school. But what you did at that point was when you graduated high school, you went to college. I mean, that was what you were expected to do. At least it seemed like there was a big push around that time that if you didn't go to college, you weren't going to have a successful life,
right.
Which I don't believe that to be true. But that definitely seemed to be the message that was pumped, at least to my generation in that time.
Yeah, it's been pumped pretty hard, and
Yeah.
I think now it's a bit better about opening people up to trades and stuff. Like I started hearing them in high school. It sounds like before that nobody really knew what a trade was, and then all of a sudden people are talking about them. I'm like, what the heck is a trade?
Right? No, and I had a buddy, a good friend of mine in high school. You know, the rest of us were talking about, okay, we're going to go this college or that college and whatnot, and he wasn't going to go to college, and we just couldn't believe. What do you mean you're not going to go to college? And what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to go work for Coke, driving a truck. So you're going to drive a Coke truck? I mean, how are you going to make a living, man? I mean, that's not, you know, how are you going to be successful? And I can remember, 3 years later, coming back and sitting around and talking, and come to find out, he'd been driving a Coke truck all right, but then he moved up in the company to where he was running a distribution center or something. He was making six figures, you know, 3-4 years out of high school, back in the, you know, late 90s.
Oh, wow.
And and here we were, broke, you know, no money and no skills really to speak of, because we're, you know, 3 years into college, which, you know, a theater degree qualifies you to be a waiter. And it just is funny to me thinking about, you know, how backwards we had that in our mindset back then. At least I can definitely vouch it was my mindset that, you know, I definitely thought, oh, if you're going to be successful, you have to go to college. And so I did, and I had a good time in college. In fact, I had such a good time, they asked me not to come back after the first year and a half. So I went to college on a full scholarship, because even though I wasn't a very good student, I was a pretty good test taker. So on the ACT, I did well enough to get a full ride offer scholarship to Arkansas State University. And then I go there and proceed to completely blow it. And just because, man, now I don't even have parents, you know, riding me to get to class and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm, you know, 8 o'clock classes were hard, you know, getting up 4 in the morning, and especially if you were out, you know, having too much fun until, you know, midnight, 1 o'clock the night before. So I think I had a 1.8, 1.6 GPA after my first year and a half. And I was at home for Christmas that year, and your transcripts come in the mail from that semester. We're on a semester system. I can remember they were being for Christmas break and getting the grades. And I knew I was on academic probation, but I thought I had it in the bag because I had good grades last time I checked. And then I opened up, in a class that I thought I had a B in, I actually got an F in. And
a little bit of a switch.
It was a switch because of this thing called the attendance policy. Well, this had never really been enforced before in any of these other classes that I'd been in, because they were big, you know, lecture hall classes. We're in kind of a stadium seating, and you're in there with a couple hundred people. But this was a smaller class, and it was actually in my major, which I think is what triggered it. It was I think, intro to theater history or something like that. And I had a solid B in it, and I said, oh, great, okay, I got high enough GPA, I'll be off academic suspension. Well, I get an F in it because the professor, I think, was really making a point to me that, no, the rules are the rules, and especially this is your major. You're not showing up to class. You violated the policy. Here's your F. And that was a harsh lesson, but it was a needed lesson, quite frankly, for me. And so I had to call that professor. I was like, what happened? You know, I got failed. You failed me, and now I'm not going to be able to. They're saying I can't come back to school now. And, you know, of course, here I am having this conversation at Christmas with my family.
Right.
You know, so I can remember he told me, all right, well, first off, I didn't fail you. You failed yourself. Next is, if you really want to come back to school, I didn't realize that you were, you know, this was going to suspend you. I'm not changing the grade. It's an F. But what I will do is, if you come up here, I think it was like the next day, the school faculty would still be in session, but, you know, classes weren't. Right. He said, you come up here tomorrow, and I'll take you over to the dean, and we'll have a conversation about whether or not we can get you another chance. So I went up there, I met with him, you know, ate my humble pie, whatever you want to call it. We went over to the dean for the college, and he supported a application to have a waiver of the suspension or something. I forget what it was called. But anyway, I got another chance. And from that point on, I actually graduated, I think, with a 3.2 or 3.3.
Oh, so kind of
so that, yeah, oh, no, it was, oh, this is real. This is not just fun and games anymore. Mm-hmm. And that really did And of course, that professor was the head of the theater department, so I was the example that he held up to all the underclassmen every
Right.
year, especially if I was retaking that class that I failed. He would relish, and if you don't think being here is important, ask Mr. Richter how that worked out, or that sort of thing. And so it was a harsh lesson to have to learn, but it was a lesson that I'm glad I learned it then and not later in life, because I think those kind of lessons get harder and harder the later in life you learn them.
Right.
So, but anyway, so that gets me through. I graduate. I thought I was going to go to master's school. I was going to teach. I wanted to teach on the college level for theater, because if you don't want to wait tables, what do? You teach. As far as with a theater degree, and I had applied for grad schools, and I was getting the rejection letters one by one, because I'd only applied to the top 10 schools, because I thought, well, if I don't get in the top 10, it's not worth going. So one by one, I was getting the rejection letters, and part of the application process for all these schools was to do an audition, and the places they do the auditions, one of the places was Chicago, which is the closest place to us. So I'd gone up there and stayed in Chicago for a while to do that audition, and really enjoyed Chicago. So I was talking to Tina, we were married at this point already, and I said, well, if I don't get into any of these grad schools, why don't we just go to Chicago? It's not as cliche as going to New York or going to LA, try to make it in theater or whatever.
Yeah.
But they've got a good theater scene there, and I think it would be, kind of fun to experience that. And so I got the last 2 rejection letters on the same day, and so that's what we did. We packed up and we moved to Chicago and enjoyed that experience. And then eventually I realized, the day jobs that I had to support, the acting dream that I had were insufficient. So I went back to school for computer programming, did some computer programming through Sears and Roebuck, the headquarters there, for a while. And then that was around Y2K, and I don't know, you're probably too young to remember Y2K, but there was a big push at that time for programmers for all this code that had been written. They were thought, all the banking systems are going to shut down because of the not having enough digits in the date. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it turned out to be a big nothing, but there was a lot of programmers that were hired around that time to work on these legacy systems. And when I was first hired at Sears as a programmer, there were 2,000 of us at the headquarters.
Holy smokes.
Just computer programmers, right? And by the time I left, after the industry just tanked, they're doing a lot of offshoring, a lot of contractors are coming in from India, that sort of thing. Because, the smart guys from India, they spoke really good English, and they would work, for the cost of a third of an American programmer.
Right.
So, business sense the business case was too strong, and I could see the writing on the wall. And sure enough, by the time I left, there were fewer than 800 of us still programming at Sears. And so I looked at what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm kind of done the acting thing a little bit, and then I've thought computer programming was going to be my life. And so I'd always had kind of an idea that maybe I'd like to do law enforcement. So at first I thought I was going to be a Chicago police officer, and I went through the steps. I went through the testing and the physicals and all that kind of stuff to get onto the force. And the more and more I got into it, the more and more I was like, I don't think this is a good fit.
Right.
So I'd also had some buddies that were lawyers at the time, and they always seemed to have the best stories at all the parties and everything, the things that happened. So that was very intriguing to me. So I started thinking about law school. Meanwhile, my parents had moved. My dad had finished working in industry. He went back, got his PhD. To teach. So he's a professor, at the time was a professor at Eastern Washington University there in Cheney. So when I started looking for law schools to go to, my wife was like, well, we've got one kid, another one's on the way, and if you're going to quit your job and go to school again, I want to be closer either to my family or your family for the support. And that made sense. Applying for law schools around, that area and that sort of thing. Gonzaga made the best deal and made the most sense for us. So that's where I ended up going to law school. So that's how I got, that was a long answer to your question of how I got to to Washington, but that, is about as quick as I can make it is how I got to Washington.
One thing really cool about your story is how you tried all of these different things and paid attention to other people and was able to learn from them. It was like, now I found my passion. It's not always a straight road, and you don't always find what you want to do right off the bat. That's.
Oh no. I've had lots of different jobs. I mean, I've had a job since I was age of 14. My very first job was working at the back end of a sale barn, running stock, cattle and hogs and stuff out of the sale barn. And I worked at McDonald's, fast food, for a number of years. The best job I ever had, except for the one I've got now. That's what you always want to say, right? No,
Yeah.
The job I have now is the best job. But the best job other than that I ever had is I actually drove horse carriages in Chicago, and that was a lot of fun. People,
horse carriages.
yeah. So tourists would come. They're happy. It's just you and your horse out there on the street. Show them the sights as you're driving your horse around Chicago. It was a lot of fun. So that was one of the more unique jobs that I had also.
Yes. So tell me about law school.
Sure. So law school is an intense thing, but it really was kind of made for me, or at least I was made for law school. Law school it's an intense, but how do I put this? There's one test in each class for the year, and that's your grade. And that's it. So
one
test. At least that's how it used to be. And I think most law schools, almost every law school at the time was the same. So everything from Harvard to Gonzaga, down to the, whatever university law school there is. The first year is pretty standard. They have a set number of the subject classes you're supposed to learn, like contracts, crim law, torts, that sort of thing. So everybody is taking those same classes, but you don't know how you're doing, right? You're in class, you get no feedback because you're not getting
doing assignments or anything,
right? There's no assignments, so
is it just nose down in the books all year long?
It is. But here's the deal. A lot of these guys had gone straight through. I already had that break where I worked, in quote unquote the real world. So I approached law school pretty much like I did my job, and if I put 40 hours into it, a week, it's doable.
Yeah.
But some guys that come straight through undergrad and straight into law school, and a lot of these people, you're now dealing with people that super intelligent, most of them.
Yeah.
But also used to being at the top of their class, used to getting that affirmation that I'm really smart. For the first time in their life, they're coming up against things where they're not succeeding, and they're not getting that feedback. So there's a mental game that really goes on in law school too.
Yeah, that's.
And it's enforced. At least at my time, it was enforced what I call a bell curve. So if you've never experienced that, what that means is on that one test, there's 100 of you that are taking that test. Let's say there will be 2 A's, but there will also be 2 F's. It's not a pass-fail.
Oh, so you're competing with the whole class.
You're competing against the class.
Oh, wow.
So there may be only 10 points difference between, if it was an actual numeric test, which they're not, usually it's essay. But let's say there would, everyone would have scored on a points test. They would have all had an A or B because they're only spread out by about, 10 points. That's not how you don't get a B because you learned the material. It's how well you learned it compared to other students.
That's a lot of pressure.
Right. So you'll have, they'll have a set number of how many A's you're going to have for that class. They'll have a set number of B's. The vast majority of you will get C's, and then there'll be a set number of D's, and then there'll be a couple of F's. So they will fail a couple of people out of each class.
Yeah.
Regardless of how well they actually did, it's just how well they did compared to everyone else, which you can imagine creates all kinds of incentives to not work well with others. So it's almost like we're being schooled.
Like pinned on each other in the class.
Yeah, we're being schooled how to be lawyers and not really play well with others from the beginning of law school. So that kind of environment is very stressful. It can drive you to do things. There's old stories about, not anymore, but used to. And for my first year, you could not use any electronic resources. There was no Google. You couldn't use LexisNexis or Westlaw. You had to go through the books, which means to get the right answer, you'd have to know how to navigate the way you research law and the shepherdizing and that sort of thing. But also to get the right answer, you'd have to find it in the book. Well, there's been stories, I don't think it's ever happened at my law school, but where some kids would find that right answer or whatever, students, and then they'd rip the page out of the book. Because again,
so then nobody
it's not
else
how
could
well
find it.
you did, it's how well you did compared to everyone else. And if everyone else can't get the right answer because the page isn't there anymore. So, I mean, that's one of the, whether or not that actually ever happened anywhere, I understand the motivation that would drive that decision. Right. But, so, it's an intense, but what I loved about law school, too, is the way you learn the law is you read stories. And the stories are the cases. Mm-hmm. So you read all these cases, you get the holdings, you get the rulings from the judge, and they're little stories that you read. And I love reading stories. Mm-hmm. And
that's a good way to look at it. I feel like that's
So it really is. I mean, they're stories with consequences, and they're real life stories, but they are little stories. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Yes, it was stressful, but I also liked one test a year again, because I didn't like, I didn't like necessarily a lot of schoolwork, but I love to read and getting the right answer, figuring it out is, it's kind of a fun, logic game and puzzle that you go through. And so I did pretty well in law school and was fortunate enough to graduate with honors and,
so you were the couple A's up there at the top.
There were a couple classes that what they called at the time, it's called Cali, the highest grade in the class.
Wow.
So it was a big deal, and it's something you put on your resume and that sort of thing. It used to also be called an AmJuror, which it used to be who sponsored the award. But
Gotcha.
In each class, the top grade got the AmJuror award or the Cali. So there were a couple classes that I was fortunate enough to do that in, and that sort of thing. But not consistently enough to graduate, valedictorian or anything like that. But it's a nice little fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And so it was, and it helped, my career out later on with, having just a better resume. I think that at least gets you in the door to have those conversations.
How did you kind of deal with the stress and the pressure? Was there any relief valve, something you would do, or was it just family times to get away?
Well, so we had 2 children at the time, and so that was a big relief valve, and because I made the commitment that I would leave school at school. So when I would come home, I wasn't bringing books and stuff home. If I was studying, I was still at the library. But
gotcha.
Again, I committed myself to treat it like a job, which means if my first class wasn't until 10 o'clock, I was still at the library at 8 o'clock, and I'd be studying. And then I'd do my class. You usually have about 3 classes a day, but I would be there from 8 to 5, 8 to 6 or whatever every day. Mm-hmm. And that way when I came home, I could put it aside. I could focus on, the family to a degree. But there was a lot of stress involved, but it wasn't the same kind of stress that I'd had before working at a job that I didn't really care for, worrying about whether or not I was going to get fired that day or laid off. That's a different kind of stress. So, and at the time I was there too, I had a lot of buddies in law school that were just coming back from Iraq and everything. And were using their GI Bill and that kind of stuff. And you see what they went through and the stress, it was nothing to them. I mean, I got a great friend. He's actually the godfather of a couple of my kids. He's a Marine, and we did a case together when we were first out of law school. And when I'm nervous, we're going to federal court in the Northern District of Illinois, which is in Rockford, Illinois. We had to fly out there. Here we are, 6 months out of law school, passing the bar. And we're flying out there to do a deposition and do a settlement conference. And I just can't believe it. I'm getting on a plane to go do lawyer stuff. This is ridiculous. And we end up out there, and I can remember having a conversation with him about, man, aren't you scared or nervous at all about this? Nobody's shooting at us, man. What are we scared about?
That's a great way to put it in perspective, too.
It is. And so when you're surrounded by guys like that, a good group of guys and gals, I should say, and and then also you have a family at home that kind of helps level set things a little bit for you too. I think it was actually, I know a lot of my friends thought, man, it'd be hard to do law school. It's, yeah, but even harder to do it with kids and a family. I'm like, I kind of think the opposite. I think it really was a supportive mechanism for me, having that family that I could come home to and kind of realize that, no, this is what real life is about, and that sort of thing, and not get caught up with some of the things that were going on in law school.
Yeah, and when you separate, your school from your family and your home, I think that is a great way to do it. Treat it like a job. You're at the school for 8 hours, and then you're home and you're checked out and you're with your family.
Yep.
That's a great way to approach it, I think.
Sure.
I never even thought about that.
Well, for me it was, and because it would be undoable. Because if you try to come home, you're trying to work on something, your kid be interrupting you the whole time. All you're going to do is get frustrated. You're going to snap at the kid, and that's not going to be good for your relationship with your child, who's just want to be with dad or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, of all the dumb things I've done, at least I was smart enough at that point to realize that don't come home and force your kid to be in law school.
Right.
Your kid's not going through law school, you are. So when you're home, be home. When it's time to work. And I think that was a big help for us going through law school.
So did you go straight to being a judge, or what was the first
No. I focused mostly on, when I came out of, during law school, you do these things called internships, or what I call as a Rule 9 internship, where you get a limited license to practice law. And I had always been interested in criminal law, so I had focused most of my internships. And I went to law school thinking I was going to be a prosecutor. For sure I was going to be a prosecutor. And so I did an internship with the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office, and I also did an internship with a defense attorney, because at the time I figured, well, even though I don't really like defense attorneys or want to be a defense attorney, I should at least get a perspective from their side.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, most people, before you go to law school, that's what you think the law is criminal law. You think, it's all, with Boston Legal or whatever the TV shows where the don't, what is that one called?
Like the Law and Order?
Law and Order, that's it, right? Yeah, where it's half is the police and half is the trial, right? Yeah, so that's what you think the law is.
Yeah.
That is such a tiny proportion of what the law is. And so going to law school is almost like going back to high school or going back to undergrad, where you have to major in what you're going to study, because after your first year and a half, 2 years, that last year is really your choices are going to be a corporate lawyer, or you're a contracts or a transactional lawyer, or you're going to be what they call a proctor and admiralty. You're going to specialize in law of the high seas, international law. Are you going to do tort law, for personal injury? You're going to do medical malpractice. I mean, so those choices you make at law school kind of push you into what kind of job you're going to do. And I had always just really been fascinated and wanted to stay in criminal law, so that's where my internships went. So when I graduated law school, I had a job with a defense firm, because at the time the prosecutor's office was not hiring, and my wife at this time was going to Eastern Washington University to get her master's in occupational therapy. So we were place bound, so I couldn't just pick up and move and go somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for a job, and the prosecutor's office was not hiring, and they're the only job in town for prosecutors. As far you don't have private prosecutors. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll be a criminal. Start, looking for a job in criminal defense, and I found one. And I worked for a guy that, let's just say, was on the shadier side of things, and I started working for him right after I graduated, but I hadn't passed the bar yet. So I'm still practicing under a limited license to practice, and there's restrictions on what you can do for that that practice, that limited practice. And he was in a bind, and he told me basically to go to this court and do something that I knew that I could not do under my limited license to practice. And he said, "Well, just don't tell them." I was like, man, I'm not going to get disbarred before I even get my bar card.
Right.
I'm waiting. I've taken the bar at this point. I'm waiting for my results. And here is my boss, telling me to basically lie to the court, which is one of the things that will get you disbarred. Mm-hmm. Especially fresh out of the gate, you're the kind of person they would want to make an example of. Like, yeah, this is not how you're not going to practice like this by lying to the court. And so we parted ways. The problem with that is that, fresh out of law school, you can't go around bad mouthing your employer as you're trying to interview for a new job. So I had several interviews, and of course the first question is, well, you've only been at this job for 4.5, 5 months. Why are you out looking for another job? That's a red flag to most people, especially in the legal industry. So I have to say, when I was trying to be diplomatic about it, I'd say things like, well, we just had a difference of how we practice law and that sort of thing, and so that made it very difficult to find a subsequent job. So I ended up not having to, but I ended up hanging out my own shingle and starting a private law practice. Here I was, 7 months out of law school, and I'm trying to start a private practice. But I had some great folks. It's a good legal community. So folks that I had worked with that were very kind to me and very good to me and helped me along. And for 7 years, I ran a private law practice in Spokane, mostly doing criminal defense, but did some family law and some personal injury, and kind of branched out trying to find anything that would pay the bills.
Right.
So that's what I started out doing. And then 07, the downturn in 08, 09 really came in. And as a criminal defense attorney, when people don't have money, they still get a free attorney from the public defender's office. So you're competing with a free attorney. That makes it hard to run a business.
Yeah.
So that kind of dried up. So I was looking for a way to support the family and started looking for opportunities, and a job in Pacific County came up for prosecuting attorney, and it paid decent. And I'd always wanted to live kind of on the coast. Have never lived close to an ocean before, so I thought that would be fun. But also, we were kind of tired of living in a bigger town, and Spokane's a decent-sized city. It's not near as big as Chicago was, but we were kind of at this point, or we had 4 children at this point, 5. No, we had 5, and we're looking to have more of that experience that I remember growing up with.
Yeah. You want that same kind of
thing for my kids. And I came out here, did the interview, fell in love with the area. It reminded me a lot of growing up in rural Arkansas, as far as the size town, the location. It was beautiful, and it was about an hour away from Olympia and that sort of thing. If I wanted to do something bigger, which is like how I grew up in Arkansas, we were about an hour from Little Rock. So it really made a lot of sense to us. And so we decided to make the move, and been very, very happy. But I came out here to be a prosecutor and stayed in the prosecutor's office, I think, for 5 years. And then when Judge Gales retired, I put in for the appointment with the governor's office and was appointed, and then have been subsequently through 2 elections, and that's how I became judge.
So it was a long road.
Yeah, no, typically you don't just jump into being a judge. I would say, usually you're going to at least have 10 years of experience before you sit on a bench somewhere.
Right.
Maybe a little bit less to sit on a district court or lower court bench, but to become a superior court judge, most people are going to be at least 10 years into the field before, and usually significantly longer before they become a judge.
How does seeing, or like using your experience from a prosecutor or in a defensive attorney affect how you work as a judge?
Well, I think it makes me appreciate the roles that everyone plays better, because I've done those roles. It makes me understand the difficulties each one of those positions are facing. Being a prosecutor, you have to be organized. Because you have to build the case. You have to have it all. It's a small miracle that anything ever makes it to trial, with all the moving parts that are going on,
right.
and what you do as a prosecutor to build that case, the coordination, and then getting it to trial. So on the other hand, the defense attorney, you've got to be able to react. You have to be able to really analyze things very well, and you got to be creative, I think. You can be a non-creative prosecutor and be successful. I don't think you can be a non-creative defense attorney and be successful. Because it's just a different type of job. The prosecutor, you have to follow the recipe. you got to be good. I mean, good prosecutors are also creative in the way they follow that recipe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as far as this is what I have to prove, this is the charge, this is the law, and then you have to follow the steps to do that.
Right.
As a defense attorney, every case is a brand new, clean slate. There is no, you have to search out and find what you got to build a recipe for that case every time, depending on what the facts are and what the law that's being applied to that case is I guess how I would describe it. So there are different skill sets. So I appreciate that those different skill sets are needed for those positions. Having worked with people individually as a defense attorney, I also understand the difficulties that people that are facing when they're coming to court who are charged with a crime and how stressful that is, and what families are going through and all that. So it provides a little bit of a glimpse into what that's like, and then appreciation for the bigger roles that those individuals play in the system of our justice, which it wouldn't function without those roles. So I think it was very important for me to have that experience on both. I enjoyed doing both. At times I didn't enjoy either one. It's not always an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, but that's any job as well. There's going to be things that you like and things that you not going to like. But.
Yeah, so no, it definitely comes in handy as a judge, because when I'm sitting there hearing, the attorneys saying, I'm also hearing what they're not saying, and that, so it makes it easier to kind of, I guess, understand what's really going on in a case from both perspectives, and helps me make a decision that moves the case forward in the way that's appropriate sometimes. So,
did you, when you were a defense attorney, did you ever have any cases where it's like, no, this guy, what he did, and it was like, how do you how do I defend him if I'm not lined up, with my views of how it is?
So, yes, that comes up. Every defense attorney has that experience, and every defense attorney, probably, if they're being honest with you, would say that there are times that, some cases they don't mind losing. Not that they didn't try their hardest, not that they wouldn't fight their hardest for their client, but at the end of the day, they don't feel bad about the result, even if it means that they lost the case. So what you're doing at that point, and this is a big part of law school, and the ethics that they teach you in law school, is understanding that your role is not to do what you think is right in a case all the time. Your role is to do what the law requires, and your role is also to defend or advance your client's position within the limits of the law.
Right.
But the goal of the goal of litigation is up to the client. In other words, and I would think I had more problem with this in family law cases than I did in criminal law. But you can advise, you dictate the strategy, and you can make sure that that what you're doing is legal. But as far as what the ultimate goal of that litigation is, that's up to the client, and you don't get to override. You're representing your client, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So as a defense attorney, you're also playing a role in a system that has to, the way it's set up, that if that defendant must be represented to ensure that justice for everyone is available. So in an individual case, if I know that the officers violated the Fourth Amendment through a search or seizure problem, and I know that I can suppress a piece of evidence, even though I know my client is guilty of whatever the crime is, but I know that, I can suppress this piece of evidence. Without that piece of evidence, they can't convict my client. It's my duty to make sure that piece of evidence is suppressed according to the law, regardless of the outcome of the case.
Oh, I didn't know that was.
So,
okay, that makes sense.
That's because if I don't do that, the police are using illegal means to build a case against a citizen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be that's dangerous ground to go down.
Right.
That's why those things exist. It's why we have the protections we have. It's why you're not forced to testify against yourself. You know, you have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. It's those rights that are being protected by the defense attorneys in a lot of cases, even though in the particular case it may deliver a result that to the vast of the majority of the public would seem unjust.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's not as much about an individual case at that point as it is to protecting the system and the integrity of justice to make sure it's still available for all of us. So I mean, and is it uncomfortable at times? Absolutely. Is it hard to some attorneys can't do that, and that's why they're not defense attorneys.
Right.
But understanding the role that defense attorneys play, and sometimes the struggles they go through to perform that role, I think is something that needs to be respected and I wish it was better understood by people.
Right.
So.
Well, I definitely have an understanding now. I had no idea how that worked, or how you to kind of divide the two and separate them. But I guess if you approach it like a true job, and you're upholding the Constitution pretty much, and so.
Right. Well, we're not there, especially as a judge, I'm not there to do what I want in a case. I have to follow the law. And if I stop following the law, then I'm not wearing a robe, I'm wearing a crown. I'm making myself a king instead of a judge.
Which is like the opposite of what our country is founded on.
Exactly. Yeah. And the same thing trickles down to the different roles. The prosecutor also has rules to follow by, and they're not always able to do what they want in a case based on their requirements and the ethical requirements of their role. And the same thing for the defense attorney. So it's, just because you see an attorney doing something doesn't mean that attorney personally believes that, or is personally happy about the outcome, or personally happy about what he's doing or she's doing. Same thing with a judge. Just because a judge rules a certain way doesn't mean that the judge is happy with the outcome.
Right.
But if they're a good judge, then they're going to do the right thing, and the right thing is meaning following the law. Yeah,
separating their opinions and.
Absolutely.
How do you do that? Is there any you just this like like your ethics says one thing, but the law says this. You just gotta push it back and follow the law.
Well, I think a large part of that is making sure you remember what your job is and what you're doing in your job. And unfortunately, it's getting blurred a lot. And it's one of the big tragedies of our time, I think, is the way the judiciary is being politicized. And we're having these discussions about someone's personal religious beliefs when we're vetting them to sit on the bench, or their political beliefs for that matter. And I understand why it's happening, but we've allowed ourselves to get into this trap where we believe that judges are political animals. And I understand that I'm to one degree, I understand that I am in an elected position. So yes, in the purest sense of it, there's politics there as far as, I'm elected. So I guess that, okay, there's politics, but a judge is not asked to say what he thinks the law should be or what he wants it to be. The judge is there to say what the law is. So just like looking at this table, I may wish it was a green table, it should be a green table. But you're not asking me what I think the table should be or what it is. You're asking me what color is the table. It was brown. Well, that doesn't require me to do any theological or philosophical, introspection. It's simply the analysis that you would do under the law and applying that to the facts in a case, understanding the history of the law, the case law that's interpreted that law before. So what you're looking for are good legal minds that are willing to do that logical and deliberate exercise in every case. That's what you should be vetting a judge for. This idea where we're putting judges up and we're asking them questions about, their political or their religious beliefs and that sort of thing, and because we think
That has a factor.
that has a factor. Like everybody has their personal beliefs, everybody has their religion, everybody has, even if they think they don't have a religion, they've got a religion. It just may not be one that has a name that we traditionally think of a religion. Everyone has those things. The whole point is when you put on that robe, you have to leave that aside and focus on what the question is, which is, what is the law? What does the law say? If the law says that a person must be evicted because the landlord's entitled to their home, to the property that they're leasing out, and yes, it's a horrible sob story that this person is going to be removed from the home that they've lived in for maybe a number of years, but the law requires this result, then you're not there to decide whether or not that's a just result necessarily. You're there to apply the law. Now, within some strictures, you get into the constitutional aspects of things, and that's usually for more like Supreme Court judges or justices or appellate court justices. But for the most part, those questions, and it's in our code of judicial conduct, and it's in everything that I read to the jury, all the jury instructions that I read when a jury comes to hear a case. I tell them, you are now officers of this court. You must base your decisions on the facts and the law given to you, not on personal belief, prejudice, or bias. And that's the same thing for the judge, even doubly so.
Yeah. Even a little more pressure as being the guy in the robe.
Well, I didn't realize how much the weight would be as the person actually making a decision. Having been in front of judges and advocating for a side, I didn't appreciate the weight of actually having to make the decision. And sometimes that can be very heavy.
Yeah, I can only imagine, because you're kind of choosing the fate of the person on the stand, Not really, because, they put themselves there, but...
Correct. People come to you with their disputes and their problems, and it's like, you didn't create the problem, you didn't cause it. And, a lot of times people have got themselves into positions in different disputes, there is no good answer. So no matter what you do, it's going to be a tragedy, and it's, and again, you're not there to say what you wish the law is. You're there to apply the law fairly, so everyone has equal access to that justice. And, unfortunately, there's just a lot of problems that the law is not very good at solving. So, is
there any ways that you would like to change that or fix that, or if you could, in a sense?
If there was, I wouldn't be a judge. I'd be a legislature. So when I get to the point where I think that I want to change something or change the law or advocate, I have the same power you do, and that is I have one vote. I get to vote for the changes that I want to see happen. If I want to do more than that, then it's time for me to step off the bench, and it's time for me to become some sort of advocate or legislature or that sort of thing. But I don't get to do that from the bench.
Right. So what challenges do you have to overcome being a judge in a small town?
Well, obviously, in a small town, you tend to at least know most of the folks that are in front of you. And it's something that judges from bigger jurisdictions don't, you're in the ether, right? In a bigger city, people don't know you, they don't know your kids, they don't know where you live, they don't know where your kids go to school. So there's that kind of aspect of it, that kind of challenge. I've never really, I've had some death threats and things like that, but I've never, so far it's not been to the point where I've really been worried. So from that aspect, that's fine. But from more of just you get to, unfortunately, you become intimately aware with the private problems of people that are in your community, So you see the struggles that folks are going through, and you can't detach yourself from that as you would if you were in a bigger place, because, that's so-and-so who their daughter is my daughter's friend, or and things like that. And there was, sometimes you have conversations with your kids. Yes, I know everybody on the team got invited to go to a birthday party, but you have to understand that person's upset with Dad because of what Dad did. It's not about you, honey. And that it's not just that the friends don't like you anymore. It's Dad. It's not the kids being mean to you.
Are they able to understand that?
You hope.
Yeah,
as a kid, it's hard.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, and not that that's happened very much, but there's been a couple times where things are like, okay, this is. Yes, I know, honey, that this is not. It hurts when you're the only one who doesn't get invited to go somewhere or that sort of thing. But that's not because of you. It is really because of me. Yeah,
which is sad. That someone is willing to.
Well, it is, but it's understandable. I mean, I get it. You try to understand, but it's tough when things like that affect your kids.
I'm gonna say you're much more understanding than I am.
Well, you almost have to be, or you drive yourself nuts. But
right.
But like I said, we live in a great community. That's really not happened that much. So there's that aspect that's not always pleasant. But and honestly, one of the hardest things is more people know you than you know them. So you see a lot of people, and when you're out and about, you recognize people, but you're not quite sure where from. And unfortunately, I'm horrible at it anyway. But so people will say something to you, and you'll be like, "I'm not." Oh yeah, I know. You're very familiar, and you're trying to remember how you know them, and you're trying to. Oh, is it from a case, or is it just, is it from something else that's not even to do with the court?
Right.
So there's that kind of thing. And in a small neighborhood, you always kind of feel, or a small community, you kind of feel like you're in the fishbowl a little bit. When you're out having dinner or having a drink at the bar or something like that, you're always cognizant of the ideas. How does this look? If someone saw me here tonight, what would they think? That sort of thing. Because if they saw me here tonight and they were in front of me on Monday morning, how would that go? Would they feel like this person is, someone who is going to listen to my case fairly and hear me, or is this a person that was acting inappropriate at the bar last night, and this is who I'm going to be having decide what's going to happen with my kid? So you have to be aware of that too.
Yeah, so. Your social aspect, you're pretty much thinking about and being smart of where you're at and what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you try to. I mean, you don't want to ruin your life. I mean, you have the right to a life, and you have the right to, to enjoy your life outside of work. But there's also that responsibility to make sure that you're not doing something. I think the Code of Judicial Conduct calls it brings ill repute to the bench, or makes people disrespect the court.
So that's actually in the.
It is.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a whole set of rules that they govern even your private life as a judge.
Wow, so. That's crazy. I didn't even know that. So you signed up for a lot when you become a.
Well, whether or not you realize it or not, you find out pretty quick that there's things that, and some of them are pretty. They chafe a little bit because sometimes it feels like you've got a muzzle on and you can't really speak what you really think about some things or other things. But then again, you understand the importance behind that is if a person from the community is in front of you and they've heard some of the things that you've said, will they think that you can be fair? So not only is it important that you are fair, it's that people believe you're fair. Because even if you're being fair, but people don't believe you're being fair, then they lose respect for the system, and it's a pretty fragile system when you really think about it.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that, it's not just the action of being fair and impartial. It is making sure people actually believe that to be true, and that's part of your responsibility as well.
Wow, that's awesome. It's
not always awesome. But
it's putting everything in perspective for me, though. Because I've only seen it from my side, and being able to pick your brain about what you see, and giving people the opportunity to see that it's eye opening, and I'm like, okay, this makes a lot more sense now, Because
Sure.
I I know now that I could never be a judge because I don't know. I don't think I could rule out my own personal beliefs from from the law. It's just
Well, I want to be clear. I mean, my personal beliefs and my faith and that sort of thing, I mean, they infuse who I am. I am never separating myself from my faith. But again, when you ask me what the law is, that's not a theological question. You're not asking me to debate the aspects of the benefits or the detractions of that law. You're asking me just simply what is the law, and that's not a faith-based question. That's not a personal belief question. That is simply a legal question. And if you can focus on that, and that's really where I want. We've lost that aspect in our society. We blur those things. We think asking what the law is the same as asking what it should be. And that's why we have so much problems with judges being politicized. Because one, we started to look for judges that maybe behave that way because we want to get a certain slant on the bench this way or that way, right? And we're pretty overt about it now in the questions we ask judges when they're being vetted to sit on the bench. And that has degraded the trust and the confidence in the judiciary, which,
But how can we fix this, though? I mean, how do we...
Civics.
Civics?
We have to get back to teaching civics in school. We have to understand the Constitution. It has to be taught. We have to understand the role of the legislature, the role of the executive, and the role of the judiciary. They're not the same. And the whole point is that they are different. And, Scalia when he would go visit a class, and they're usually in college or even in high school or something, like he'd give appearances, and he would start his classes. He would be there to give a little speech about the Constitution or something to students, and he'd ask the question at the beginning, what part of the Constitution guarantees you your rights? And the typical answer would be
the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights. And he would say, no, wrong. Even a dictator can have a Bill of Rights. What protects your rights is the three co-equal branches of government with the checks and balances that they have, right? Because when the legislature oversteps, the court can check it. When the executive oversteps, the legislature can check it. That's what guarantees those rights in that Bill of Rights. So you can have a list, and a good example of that would be Animal Farm. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it used to be a book you'd have to read in high school. And without getting too much into it, even the animals on the farm who took over the farm from the farmers in order to protect the animals, they write a list on the side of the barn of what the rules are going to be. But then the pigs become the new farmers,
the dictators,
and they become the dictators, the tyrants, and they slowly erase the things off the barn. And the horse, who has the longest memory of all the other animals, he's sitting there looking at the barn. He says, "I remember there used to be something here. There used to be something important here," and they cart him off to the glue factory. So I mean, books like that, civics, and understanding that the people that wrote that Constitution understood what tyranny was. They understood what you needed to have in order to assure a government that was durable. And we're only 200-something years into this, right? So we're not very far into this experiment that they call the greatest experiment, probably. And it works, but it only works if you actually put it in practice the way it's designed. And we've stopped doing that, I think, in a large part, especially when we're blurring the lines between judges and legislatures, and even to some extent a lot of the stuff with the strong governments or strong presidents versus the legislatures and the powers and executive branch. I think we really need to get back to understanding civics, understanding the different roles that our branches of government play, and respecting that. And I think that would be, the way to fix it.
Do you feel like professors and such now are almost pushing that in the law school and
Well,
such?
it's been a long time since I've been, so it's hard for me to say where it's coming from, other than the fact that I just don't think I don't think it's taught much anymore.
Right.
Like in the high school levels where this really needs to be done. How do you end up going into college and you don't understand? And I taught a college class at Eastern. I was filling in for a professor who was on sabbatical in criminal law, and this was a 300 level course. So this was, a course that was, for a major.
Yeah.
These were government majors in my class, and we were having to do basic things, just of like, okay, how does the law get, the bicameral legislature? I mean, terms like that were having to be gone over and talked about in a 300 level government class. I can understand if you're a theater major coming into a government class and you haven't thought about, what a legislature is in a long time. But, if you're in a government major and you're coming in, you don't understand the basic tenets of our government, something's wrong. And that needs to start in high school. It was in high school when I was there. I don't know what happened to it.
I'm actually, I was subbing as a para at the school
Yeah.
recently, and I was with this behavioral kid, just following him around. And he's in 7th grade, and he's in civics, and that was one of his hardest subjects. So it is there.
Good.
At least, should we have a little bit more? Because 7th grade to adulthood is a long time for somebody. So I mean, one more class or 2 more classes, I think would be probably pretty good.
Well, I can't speak to what actually is taught because I haven't been in school in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
All I can tell you is the result that I see. It doesn't seem like we're teaching it right. That's all I can say. And that's concerning because it really is a fragile system. The only way it survives is if it's implemented in the way it was designed to work. And I see that it just seems to be, it's being
Almost like manipulated?
Well, manipulated, it may be too strong, but it's being misunderstood a lot.
Okay.
I think is what I would say. And that misunderstanding leads to mistrust, and the system only runs on trust, right? I mean...
Yeah, I can say there's definitely a lot of mistrust out there, at least.
Yeah. And
I have a little bit myself.
Well, I think there's a lot of that today, and government only governs by the consent of the will of the people. And if there's no trust from the people, then eventually there's no consent of the people. And when there's no consent of the people, how do you govern them?
Right.
So, then that's the scary thing.
Yeah. Very scary.
That's a downer. What's up?
Okay, yeah.
What's a happier.
So, how do you campaign in a small community? What's the route we go down?
So I actually enjoy the campaign aspect of it. Some things I didn't like too much. The door knocking was a little, in a small community, you're almost expected to knock on every door, and because everyone expects you to have that personal connection, because it's not a huge community, and they think if you're working hard, you can do it, which they're not wrong. But I enjoyed aspects of the door knocking, but there's a lot of interesting things that happen at door knocking that. You get run off of places, and and you feel. And I'm not a very. I don't want to bug people or bother people. So you always feel like you're going onto their property and you're knocking on their door. You feel like a door-to-door salesman when they used to do that. So and people are kind of not in the best mood to have people just walk up to the door. But on the other hand, a lot of people actually expect you to do that. So you're kind of trying to balance that out. A lot of parades. I enjoy the parades for the most part. I think they're fun. The kids enjoy them too for the most part. So they participate we participate as a family and things like that.
That's cool, though. That's a good way to bring you together and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And going to different events and having the people, get to meet you and understand, who you are a little bit and have those little encounters with you is important, I think, in a small community. And so you can have more one-on-one conversations. We did, I think, one debate, my opponent and I, not really even a debate, but I guess it's a debate at a forum at one of my elections, and that was fine and went fine. But I don't know that those are as helpful as actually just having conversations with someone and getting to know them a little bit and seeing if there's somebody you think would be appropriate for the job. And in a small community, a campaign, you you can have contact with a fair amount of the voters, the majority of the voters, I would say, if you're participating in all the different events that are going on. And we have so many events in this area. It's really, you don't know how much is going on until you actually try to participate in a lot of it. And so it was really fun to get to meet folks that I wouldn't have met otherwise, and see things that I wouldn't have seen, and participate in things that I wouldn't have participated in otherwise, just because they're not on your radar, But when you're actually trying to go out there and meet people so they get to meet you, you're putting yourself out there more and engaging in these activities more. And, we had a good time. It's tiring. It's exhausting because you're also still, working the full-time job, as you're campaigning can be a full-time job. And, of course, there's always the specter of losing your job at the end of that process too. So that can be a little stressful.
Right.
So,
yeah. So how do you personally make an impact on our community?
How do I personally make an impact on the community? Well,
or through your job, or however you want to take that.
Well, I think through my job, I think it would be pretty more, I guess, self-evident as far as the impact that I have on individuals who are before me, and unfortunately for some of those folks, I'm sure it's a negative impact, at least in their minds, what they see and what happens. So I would like to think through my job I'm having the impact of making sure that everyone in this county feels that they have the opportunity to address and have their disputes heard fairly and resolved in a way that they felt heard, they felt respected, and even if they lost, it wasn't because, for some reason other than that's what the judge honest deliberation under the law came to that result. I would hope that'd be the impact that I have in the county through my job. But honestly, I hope my impact would be a lot more through my engagement in other activities that I do outside of my job. We're really involved in our church. We're involved in community activities. I love this community. They've been wonderful to me and my family. We have absolutely fell in love with Pacific County. So I would hope that we're returning some of that love back to the county through the activities that we do and whatnot. So, that's...
What kind of activities are you doing?
Well, I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus, and we do a lot of community events. We make, for the last 2 years, we've done a free Thanksgiving Day dinner.
Oh, wow.
And fed over 200 people each time. We collect money for crisis pregnancies. We provide support for individuals and their families who are struggling. I participate with the Elks in their good works. I teach Sunday school at our church, and I've coached a little bit in Spokane, more in Spokane. Was a Little League coach and things like that. So, making the time and giving back in ways such as that, very involved with the Kiwanis scholarships and taking care of the Oddfellow Cemetery. So in trying to find ways where there's a need that I can fulfill and that our family can be a positive influence again on the county.
That's super cool. And these are like things I didn't know that you were doing. And
well, you're not blowing a trumpet before yourself as you do your good works typically. And I don't mean to say that we're great at it or that we should be blowing a trumpet or anything, but I find a lot of satisfaction and a lot of joy in doing that. And I think it makes you I think that the psychology is pretty clear. The more time you spend thinking about yourself, the more miserable you are. And the more time you spend about, thinking about others and taking care of others and enjoying, that type of work. And it is very enjoyable. It's work, but it's enjoyable most of the time. The better off you are, the more well-adjusted you are. And so, it's good for the community, but it's really good for me. and it's good for our family.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I have one final question for you. What do you want for your kids growing up in America in today's world?
What do I want from I want them to have the opportunity to live a life that is worth living, and the opportunity to find love and to share that. I think that's what I would hope the most for.
I don't think there's anything else in the world that you really need besides that, That's a really cool, really good message. Well, thank you for coming. I'm going to have to listen to this one a couple times and probably go take another civics class or something.
Well, I enjoyed it, and it was a unique experience for me too. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Walk of Life podcast.